And we're live.
Brilliant, fantastic. Kia ora everybody, welcome. We'll just commence with our karakia to start the proceedings, and then we'll go through into introductions, if that's okay. So the Commission karakia ki te uru, whakatakata hou ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tarata ki tai. Kia hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he heihu, ti hei Māori ora. And as we commence today, it would be useful for us to acknowledge mana whenua of the rohi that we are considering, the iwi and hapu of this land. And we're acknowledging that we are entering your space by technology different to what is usual. I'll just see I need to adjust the camera, which is fairly normal in these sorts of situations. So the technology today does make it a little more challenging, but this is what we have to do across New Zealand. And just to give you a sense, I'm nowhere near my home base. Trying to use different offices each day does create little challenges for somebody who is not completely computer literate. So just bear with us as we go through. What we'll do first of all is introduce the commissioners, the members from the commission team, and then Mayor Paula will pass over to you for your introductions and then get into the proceedings. So if I could just call on Commissioner Anea and then Commissioner Piper.
Kia ora everyone, great to be with you today. For those who don't know me, I'm Janie Anea and I've been involved with local government for 18 years. 9 of those as Mayor of Timaru, and I've had another 7 years on top of that as a member of the Local Government Commission. So thank you, looking forward to this afternoon. Cheers.
Just the mute, Commissioner Piper.
Kia ora koutou nā rangatira mā. I'm Sue Piper, and like my colleagues, I've been hanging around local government for a number of years in various capacities, including as an elected member and as a policy wonk for government. It's good to see you all. I wish I was there really, but we'll do it on Zoom. Cheers.
Kia ora, and my name's Brendan Duffy, former Mayor of Horowhenua for 12 years, another 9 years on the local authority. And some time on National Council and a few other roles around the rohi. And we give you that little background because people do need to get a bit of a sense that the commissioners have some understanding around what it is that goes on in local government. And, you know, we're working on proceedings at the moment that are the purest principles of democracy. So it's really, really important that commissioners have a good understanding around these issues. Also on the screen, you'll see Donald Riesebos, our principal advisor. Donald is well in excess of 40 years in local government, and Penny Langley, the teenager, who's our CEO on the commission. So that's our team. We'll pass over to you, Mayor Paula, for your intros, and then we're very keen to get straight into the business of the day.
Kia ora koutou katoa. It's really nice to see you and some familiar faces because, as you will know from me, I've also been involved in local government politics an awful long time. This is my 21st year, but my first term as mayor here, but coming from a regional sector before that. And I've come across a number of you on various advisory groups that I've participated on over those 20 years. So good to be here. Good to have been through a number of these reviews as well, so it comes around too quickly. Lance, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Kia ora, Lance Vervoort, toku ingoa, tumu whakarai. I'm Lance Vervoort, Chief Executive of Hamilton City Council.
Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Stewart. I was the project manager for the Wider Representation Review over the last year.
Kia ora, Chelsea.
Kia ora, Michelle Hawthorne. I'm the Governance and Assurance Manager.
Kia ora tātou, Dale Frosky. You all know me. I'm the Electoral Officer for Hamilton City.
No, we don't know him. Nobody knows him. So thank you very much for having us. I'll just make a few introductions before you want us to go straight into the slides. and looking forward to giving you a context to how we landed where we landed, and then later after the appellants, having that time to come back in any unresolved issues at that point. We've done a consultation in a number of phases, to be honest. So we've had 429 responses to our initial proposal, and that was very early on in the piece, alongside just under 1,000, 994 to be precise, when we were consulting on Māori wards and that process. We had a lot of really robust comment from the public, which was really helpful. And so we feel quite confident that the outcome that we've landed on represents the view of the wider public that we did involve in the process. So if you have any questions on that later, that would be fine. So Lance is going to just kick us off with some introduction, and I'll go over the other detail.
So Chair Brendan, we're just going to show a few slides just to help guide us through this. Just starting off, I'd also like to acknowledge the appellants, you commissioners, and the wider public for their participation in this review process, which has been comprehensive. It should be noted that I wasn't CE at the time, and I haven't had a lot of direct involvement in the actual review process, apart from being Deputy CE and General Manager, but not the person responsible for it. So I'll be actually handing over to Mayor Paula to run us through the actual detail around the process. She and elected members and the team behind me have been on the journey in detail. Despite that, I'd like to set the scene for the review with some key points about the environment in which the review was carried out. And to be honest, many of these aspects have also been experienced by other councils, which you've probably heard in your work. As the commissioners will be aware, changes to the Local Electoral Act last year led many councils across New Zealand to consider the introduction of Māori wards into their representation systems. This was a welcome opportunity and strongly supported by Hamilton City Council's Māori partners and also the wider community. And I think that's reflected in over 800 of the 1,000 submissions in support of Māori wards, which is quite significant. At Hamilton City Council, we just recently carried out a robust wider representation review throughout 2017, 2018, 2019. And we weren't scheduled or resourced, to be honest, to carry out another until 2023-24. However, the decision to establish Māori wards at the end of May 2021 meant that the council had to gear up quite quickly to complete a full wider representation review by the end of that same year. Obviously, we weren't alone in this, and many other councils not already in a review cycle were in the same boat. So we haven't been alone, and I'm sure you'd know that. We'd also like to acknowledge that legislative deadlines for the review process were adjusted to make it possible for councils to achieve this, and we're really grateful of that support. What made it possible to achieve a robust review process from our end? Three things really, probably the can-do attitude of elected members, staff to dig into the issues, to ask a lot of questions, to engage in strong debate and commit to the process, and also the deadline requirements, which were, reasonably tight. Secondly, our Māori partners for making the space for the conversations that needed to happen, to help guide us in the matters that concern them most, and also for encouraging their communities to get involved in the process. And thirdly, individuals and groups across the city that make up the Hamilton community activating around the issues and having their say during consultation. And as you know, in local government, sometimes it's difficult to get people to engage in various processes, but I think we were reasonably successful in that. We were fortunate that the recent 2018 representation review had been particularly robust in terms of community of interest analysis. So we were quite prepared with comprehensive relevant information to support this current review. Staff undertook careful options development and analysis in preparing the briefing material and facilitating workshops for our elected members. They worked very hard, I have to say, to ensure that elected members had a thorough understanding of all the matters under consideration and any implications of these, and obviously they can be quite complex. The support was also extended to Council's Māori partners to ensure that their understanding and ability to contribute to the review and engage with their stakeholders was also in place as well. We're really happy with the level of engagement we had from the community on this review. We had over 420 submissions compared to 37 in the 2018 representation review. And we believe it's great to see our community becoming more interested in matters of representation. We've put quite a bit of effort into that over the past couple of years. A key consideration for Hamilton City Council in carrying out the review was the decision at the end of 2020 was to move to an STV electoral system. This, combined with the introduction of Māori wards, meant that the options for representation arrangements, particularly the implications of those different option combinations, were more complex than previously. And that's the reason why we needed to have good information so that people could understand those complexities and before they put in their submissions. Different combinations of decisions could have implications for electors in the wider community that were not immediately obvious, such as the number of overall councillors, impacting the number of Māori ward councillors due to legislative rules around that proportionality side of things. Careful analysis, clarity and consideration of the potential impact of different options being considered was crucial to ensuring a good outcome. The changing shape of the electoral system also added complexity for the community, who obviously will be navigating a very different looking election process this year. And that was a key consideration for elected members in their deliberations. Amy, if we can have the next slide.
Sorry, can we see if we can minimize that screen? Up in it. Top. Down.
On the top screen, you
Go down, if you just go.
Sorry, blocking out some of the screen here. Okay. There were many factors and perspectives to take into account when determining the best representation arrangements for the Hamilton community. Three primary areas that Council must consider are understanding our communities of interest, effective representation and fair representation. In doing so, Council's guided by a number of things, obviously the legislative rules, such as the plus or minus 10% in determining fair representation, the Local Government Commission guidelines and definitions, of course, future plans and projections, using the most up-to-date statistics and data, and the preferences of our Māori partners, and also consultation with the wider community. Obviously, that's very, very important. What follows, we're going to get Mayor Paula to take you through a journey around our representation review and what the process that we followed. So I'm going to hand over to Mayor Paula now.
Thank you. So no way of seeing them without, because I prefer to see, unless I'm talking to myself, the participants. Sorry, we're just looking, because I can't see you at the moment, and I find that really weird on Zoom, because it feels like I'm just talking to myself.
Well, we can see them, but it's just whoever's.
You know, that's why I've got slides for me.
It's just anyone watching online.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hi, thank you. I know you're familiar, we won't waste too much time on the very first slides because you're familiar with the background and context, and Lance just stepped that through. We're all familiar with the statistical and legislative requirements, the need to take into effect communities of interest, fair and effective representation. So we actually canvassed 5 preliminary options for ward arrangements, one citywide, 2, 3 or 4 general wards, or a mixed system. Each were modelled with both 12 and 14 elected members, citywide Māori ward, with or without community boards. So we got quite complex in the modelling, as you could see. And believe me, there was a great deal of robust debate. With Māori, because I have seen some of the appellant's comments in respect to engagement with Māori, there were 3 engagement points for our Māori partners prior to developing the initial proposal. We've met with iwi, Mātāwaka, Mana Whenua, and we've had further periods of engagement with Māori partners, and we developed a fact sheet to circulate so that everyone had a full understanding. So without going into labour it, we've had many conversations. We have joint management agreements with our Māori partners, and we used every mechanism that we had at our governance and at a staff level to talk with Māori. And the 17th of June, Māori partner-led wānanga to discuss the preferences of the election. Oh, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Orange one. Okay, so we presented this kind of model to them for their consideration. I think you can see that represents what I was talking about before. Next slide, please. And at those times where the staff answered all of their questions, we talked about how the statistics works to confine representation in some way, the electoral roll definitions, standing and voting in a Māori ward, how that happens, voting structures, constraints of any territorial boundaries, whakapapa voting and residents. Next, please. So in June the 25th, we had a council workshop to develop the initial proposal, and that was, after all, a considerable amount of consultation. They were provided a full information and analysis of communities of interest, representation options and the implications of each option. They had to consider a number of things: the number of councillors, the structure of the electoral board, and of course community boards. And I'll just note that Lance already told you before that we had already agreed to change our voting system from first past the post to a single transferable vote. So that in itself is a considerable step change in what voters will see from this council going forward. So if you want to go next slide, please. So we did get the comprehensive, we got that? Next slide. Oh, thank you. Comprehensive briefing pack, a full overview of the communities of interest in Hamilton, both the general population and the Māori community. And in that, I can just say that, you know, we had conversations about who we represent as councillors, to what extent east and west Hamilton, because we're a river city, so we've got a clear geographic boundary. What did that matter? Did it matter, or were we able to span that geography? And so there was actually a lot of debate, and we explained how different representations might work, including going from 2 east-west to 4, 2 east and 2 west, and whether there was to be southeast or northeast and so on. And we shared with councillors at that time the iwi preferences for all 3 decisions. So iwi were well and truly involved in shaping up their own destiny, if you like. And then if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Council, we had another council workshop. Comprehensive research and community engagement was carried out. The research, the data and the robust information came to this round of consultation. The 2018 research included a community profile survey with 1,600 odd respondents, focus groups, telephone surveys, and more. Plus, you know, through social media channels and everywhere else that people talk to us through. We looked at things like the movement patterns, how people get to home, from home to work, to school, to shop, where their sense of community actually was and their belonging, the current representation arrangements, and the demographic data, the latest demographic data that we could get our hands on. Next slide, please. If I'm missing anything, just sing out. So you can see that this is a completely easy to understand diagram. And you can see the analysis that we've actually presented with the 5 options.
It's just an indication of the overview of the options that we looked at and the types of things that elected members took into account. So
yeah,
yes.
Here we go, it's better. Allergies. Yeah, so you can see we pretty much went line by line across the 5 options, ranking them on the various attributes that the options brought to the table. Next slide, please. So, council meeting to resolve the initial proposal happened in August. 2 options. The key difference was whether general wards was citywide or we retained east and west. So all of that analysis that you saw before basically didn't stack up against elected members' interest or the data, and we decided to stick with the conversation about whether there would be a general ward, all Hamiltonians together, thank you, or east and west general wards. No community boards at that point in time was our recommendation. On the basis of the considerable amount of analysis analysis we've done, nothing had really thrown up a strong desire for community boards at that time. And also with the considerable change to STV, we felt that the public probably had enough new things to grapple with in one electoral cycle. So we consulted on that. We used printed press, radio, social media, online advertising. There was a hard copy, of course, as there always is, and an explanatory video. We tried our very best to digest what we were thinking about for the general public, because it actually, when you look at the analysis we did before, this wasn't a standard exercise. It wasn't just a for or against, there was a lot of nuance. So next slide, please. Next, yeah. Thank you. What's coming? Okay. In this next phase, anyway, we did. We should be seeing a nice screen in any minute now. We did look at no screen. We did look at what was in and out of scope, because people in the general public tend to use this as an opportunity to raise other issues about how they engage with council. So we were pretty clear about what we could talk about and which we couldn't talk about. And we asked the respondents, if respondents supported the initial proposal, why or why not? So we didn't go canvassing again for all those very early iterations, because we'd already kind of discounted those, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. So we got over 400 responses. Each of the individual components of the proposal was supported by the majority, who chose to comment on them, except community boards. So everything else went through quite smoothly, to be honest, except there was a little bit more interest in the community boards. There was a relatively low overall response to this aspect, however. 10% of those who responded, just under 50%, wanted to see community boards established. So there wasn't any clear, definitive push for community boards. It was, the way I would see it, I think it would be accurate to say it was an area for exploring. And in our conversations, to be honest, with councillors, a number of councillors also were keen to explore what would that mean, how would you do it, what would be the pros and cons, when might you do it. But anyway, we had a further workshop discussing what we'd heard from the hearings, and the only changes, of course, we felt could be made, because they were in scope, were could only be made if it was justified by overall consultation. So go back to my previous point. There wasn't a lot of drive in our responses from the public for change. They were generally quite comfortable with where council had landed. So we would just basically sought confirmation from the elected members, and if they needed any supporting information. And that came back to council for the final proposal in November. The initial proposal was presented without change, because, as I say, we didn't have any momentum towards change. We reiterated the key aspects of the consultation, any additional questions for EMs. And actually, as I say, no strong justification for change, but it included a recommendation for staff to come back on report on a process for the establishment of 2 trial community boards going forward. And of course, that would inform the next review. So final steps was the public notice of final proposal, to which, as you know, 5 appeals were received. So that's really the slides in total. I guess what I would like to say about the community boards from a political perspective, being governance in the room here, is that there was some sentiment, as we've been working very strongly on engaging our wider community in many ways. There was some sentiment to how can we engage with our community better, and would community boards be the mechanism or not? And how could we explore that space? Having said that, because it wasn't something that we initially proposed, it wasn't highly supported, and there was already enough change on the table, we decided to offer up this opportunity to explore it, but not go with it for this particular time, if that makes sense. So, yeah, so we're still in that space. We're still looking at how we elevate the engagement in the elections generally. We did a lot better. Last time in the LTP, for example, we got phenomenal uptake in engagement from where we were. So we're intending to work in that same way to lift the participation in this election. And then we're open to, I will say, by the way, it's very difficult to do nuanced conversations with the community around community boards in the middle of a global pandemic when you're doing it this way. So that was another factor where we couldn't really engage more broadly with the community, only those few that chose to come in and present to us. Another reason for not having it at this time. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that general overview, and I will make the acknowledgement that we've made right across this piece of work that COVID didn't help with the communication into community. So that has been a strong criticism from a number of communities around that. But we make the acknowledgement that we believe that local authorities have done everything they possibly can to find every trick of technology to be able to engage as best that they can under the circumstances. We make that same acknowledgement to you as well, Mayor Paula.
Point in time, we feel that will also be the case for elections. Just want to put that in front of the Commission.
Thank goodness that's not our deep piece of work at the moment. Look, we just need to open up for questions from commissioners. We've got about 10 minutes before our first submitter comes in. So I'll just bear with me, get the screen to help me here. Right, still can't get that to do exactly what I want. That's better. Commissioners, Commissioner Anea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question. When you engaged with your Māori partners, and I know that you gave them the options that were available to them, what was their reasoning for not wanting to have 2 Māori councillors?
We do have to.
We are proposing 2.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got that wrong. I put down 1 instead of 2.
No, it's 2.
Apologies.
Okay.
That's why I couldn't understand it. Perfect.
No, so there was 2, and that's all based on population.
Yeah. So it's 2
Lovely. Thank you, because I knew you could have 2. Perfect.
We also incidentally have 5 Māngai Māori sitting on standing committees as appointed by Māori. So just an interesting point.
Okay, Commissioner Piper.
Thank you, Chair. I should have asked this question of the officials much earlier, but I forgot. What's the population of Kirikiriroa Māori Ward?
Māori Ward.
26,700.
That was quick, Dale. Thanks for that. It gave me, so that's yeah. So it's got a population per councillor that mirrors the general wards.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Just double checking. Now, you're suggesting that you've recommended to the incoming council that they investigate the establishment of community committees. What do you think their advantages might be over community boards?
Well, that's precisely the issue we want to explore. We had such limited feedback in the process about community boards, some that you have heard of in the appellants, so you would have seen, and Holly will be talking with you. but that came in quite late, and so that was the only piece of outside information that we had on community boards or community committees. There was a lot of talk, but it was getting a little bit wide and a bit out of scope because, you know, there hadn't been that clear mandate from the public at this point in time around how best to engage with the community and what does it look like. Is it a community board? As you know, some community boards up and down the country seem to be working very well. Others may be working less well. I'm not going to comment on individuals, but that's the way it is. And there's about as many different examples of how they work as there are boards. So we just hadn't gone into that space in any depth. We felt we would be better to do it properly than to do it in a rushed way, and to really explore the benefits and the implications of it. And that's that simple, really, because, you know, in principle, councillors were warm to the idea of increasing our tentacles into the community for engagement with us.
It's almost like a due diligence type exercise in some ways. Just carrying on from what Mayor Paula was saying. So to actually, you know, explore with the community what might work best, and then go from there.
Okay.
Yep, that's good. Thanks. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
So just, Commissioner Pop, do you mind, can I just extend that same line of questioning? Because I think it's important. Given the anticipated growth that is occurring, and you've clearly articulated that, the model that you've chosen for this time feels like you feel that that's going to work, but you're signalling we might need some community boards. So how confident are you that the current model will serve well for how much longer into the future? You've got this growth occurring. Do you reckon it's a threat? What I'm trying to get my head around is that when the Commission makes its decision, it will certainly want to make some observations about what needs to be done next time, so that when you guys go on the next lot coming, it doesn't get forgotten. So I'm just trying to get my head around. I'd like to hear some thinking about what do you think it's going to look like in 3 or 6 years' time? If that's okay, Commissioner Piper, I just want to, yeah, okay.
I'm happy to start off with that, and then Lance might have something to add. We are aware with the way that Hamilton's growing, 170,000, you know, that we're going to get too big to be served in the current model. But of course, you know, you've got to balance up your representation with its effectiveness and efficiency. So one of the other topics that will undoubtedly come back in my view is the 4-ward system, where we have east, west, so we have a quarter of Hamilton represented, on the basis that those communities of interest would be able to identify with some councillors that take their business on. But in all reality, there was a little bit divided at council, with some people feeling that we're there for the whole city anyway once you're elected, so what does it matter what the boundaries are? It's just a matter of being able to service parts of your city. And others feeling that no, it's really nice that, say, a Dinsdale resident knows fully well they can go to one of their West councillors who know the area, who know what they're dealing with there, and that kind of thing. We've had conversations that are interesting that we'd like to explore with youth about how we improve our youth engagement, grappled with ideas ranging from youth council, but is that the best way when we've been outreach programs to youth? Some of our staff have been doing the most phenomenal amount of work in some of our secondary schools and reaching a far broader audience of youth than they could have ever done in bringing 12 around a table as a youth council. So it's that same consideration. We have ethnic communities through the settlement centre that we can reach into in that way, in their place, in their space and in their place. So there's a range of views. I guess if there were to be community boards, we'd want them to be truly representative of the community that we represent, not just those people who are the vocal minority or the passionate vocal minority. Bless them for being so, but they can create capture. So there's a whole heap of conversations yet to be had, you see.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Do you want to say anything on that, Lance?
Well, I'm not sure, Commissioner Brendan, if you're going down the track of just looking at our population growth, get into statistical side of things where, by 2033, we're going to be up around anywhere from 205 to 218,000 people, which is, 30 or 40,000 person growth in, 11 years or so. So I wasn't sure if you were looking at, what should we do in a, 6 to 9 year time frame, or a 3 to 6 or something like that. So interested in maybe if you could expand on your question.
I'm sensing the shorter time frame than the longer, in anticipation of the growth that is going to occur, and the fact that growth projections are generally undercooked rather than overcooked. so I'm hoping, well, and essentially you've already given a signal that you see the opportunity to explore community committees, potentially community boards. You're talking about significant growth, and I'm just getting a sense from you and going from Mayor Paula's observations that in the next 3 to 6 years there'll need to be something done, and that's really what I wanted to get my head around. Yeah. So we'll go back to Commissioner Piper.
You were going to, Chelsea was going to add something to this.
I was just going to note.
Sorry.
That's right. I was just going to note that as part of the recommendations, we have committed to review the system in the next round. It's budgeted.
Yep.
And that's a commitment that we made to our iwi partners, but it also allows us that time to look into community advocacy arrangements.
Yep.
And
Yep.
those kind of things.
Yep. Good point, and I did note that. Thank you. Commissioner Piper.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just go back to that slide with the matrix of representation arrangements, and then there was down the side there was high, medium, low, effectiveness criteria, I guess, of that thing. Can we just put that one up again? I just hadn't seen anything like that, and I was a bit curious.
Amy's working on it, I believe.
We have a copy now, but it's sort of beyond me to try and talk to you. And
is it coming there, Amy? You're managing?
Yeah, Amy's having some problems getting.
Okay. Shall I see if I can find one at my end?
Yeah.
If Amy, if you're having technical difficulties, I believe I've got a copy here that I can share.
That's a good idea.
Green share.
You can see why Penny's our CEO, can't you? Very clever woman.
Don't ask me to put it up.
No, we haven't. We haven't.
Let's,
we would have asked the mayor, but
Yeah. No, you don't want to ask me about IT. I'm telling you, you really don't.
We just had a conversation about our Wi-Fi on our night before.
Yeah. It's probably one of the very rare times I can be less than polite.
Was that it?
it was.
Was there?
That was it.
Yeah, definitely. It's the blue number.
can you see that clearly?
Yep.
Yeah. So I kind of understand a degree of elected influence on full council. Does that mean, like, if it was citywide, it'd be high?
Yeah.
So you say that on what basis? This is remember, this is a primer for me. So treat me like I'm an idiot.
Do you want to say?
It's the big meeting. So basically the number of elected members that an elector gets to influence the election of. So for example, if you're in the East Ward under STV, your vote and your ranking of candidates has the potential to influence the election of 6 candidates.
That's right.
So if it's 5, then that'll go higher.
So they have that influence over 12, 13 if you're including the mayor as well.
Okay. And the candidate expenditure allowance, are you talking about how much a candidate would have to spend, or what the law says that the maximum they can spend?
Law, what the maximum the law says a candidate can spend.
Oh, is it different for ward than at large?
Yes, because it's based on population. So the smaller the ward, therefore the smaller the population, therefore the smaller the limit.
Oh, okay. I'd never.
And so on that matter, some of our councillors who made the point about reach of people wanting to be elected, when the budget is bigger, it puts it out of reach for some people. It's actually.
Oh no, I absolutely agree with you. I think that's, you know, I think that, yeah, it's an issue. It is an issue. Yeah, absolutely. And increasingly so now that we don't have newspapers, community newspapers, for example. Number of voters per elector. Now that one has got me a bit foxed. Number of votes. Oh, how many votes an elector has. Sorry. Yeah. Sometimes I understand if I read it out loud to myself, it makes people look at me on the bus, really. Hey, thank you. That's very, very helpful. And
can we just keep that up there for a minute?
Yep.
I just need to just go to, if you can just go to Donald for a minute. Donald, can you just double confirm that the observations made around the voting, the budgets for campaigning, can you just, I'm just looking at your body language there, was that all accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. Yeah. So
Okay,
there are population bands, which set the maximum candidate can spend for their election.
Yep.
Yeah, you see, I sort of would. I never knew. I've never known that before. So thank you, Donald and Hamilton City, for pointing that out.
Okay, Commissioner Piper, have you done, or you?
I am done. I just can't work out
Brilliant.
how to. I can now. Yeah, cool.
Right. No, that's fantastic. Okay, look, I think we've given that a pretty good go. So what I'd like to do now is move over back to Penny, who will bring in the first appellant, Holly Snape.
Yes, there's a few people joining us from Community Waikato, and so I'll just bring them through into the meeting now. It'll just take us a wee moment to make sure everyone comes in and gets settled in.
Now, Dale, you will have alerted the team for write a reply for if there's anything comes up. Yeah, thanks.
And there's one other thing I wanted to just check. Holly, you might be able to help me with this, I'm not sure. There is another person in our attendees list, but I can't tell from their username if they may or may not be Neil Tollan.
Yes, it probably will be, because I'm not seeing Neil here currently.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, I'll take a bit of a punt and see if this person turns out to be Neil or not.
Sure. Yeah, Western, that's right.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So those of you who've just joined, if you can take yourselves off mute so you're ready to speak when it's your turn, and if anyone can turn their video on, that would be appreciated too. Lovely, over to you, Brendan.
Okay, welcome everybody. So I'm not sure how much you've been observing so far. Had a good observation, seen that. Okay, so rather than go into deep and meaningful introductions, I think we'll use our time better by asking you to offer your observations, clearly a summary of that which you've already sent to us. And so we'll pass, I think, to you, Holly, to lead off.
I think Jamie's just going to start us and then I'll jump in.
Sure. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Nā mihi kia koutou katoa. He mihi atua tuatahi ki te atua. Ko ia te timatanga o te whakamutunga o nā mea katoa. Ki nā mate kua neke atu nei haere, haere, haere. Kei te upoko ariki a tūheitia, te whakakotahitanga o nā kauai rangatira o te motu. Noho ora mai I te ahurewa tapu e o matua tipuna. Waikato horo pounamu, waikato tani wharau, he piko he tani wha, he piko he taniwā. Ki te whare e tū nei, a te marae e tākoto nei. Tēnā rā koutou, ngā waihanga o rātou mā. He mihi aroha kia koutou, a committee LGC, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Thanks, Jamie. Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity for us to speak today. While there are a few of us in the room, obviously speaking, there are a lot more who have been involved in this process as well, who have supported us to create our initial submission. There have been people who have stayed connected with our updates through this process and who are watching on Streamline on YouTube as well. So I did want to acknowledge the other supporters. And before we really get into it, I do want to give you a bit of an idea about who is speaking today. So if we start off with Neil, Neil is the manager of Western Community Centre. He has an extensive history in community development and working with disenfranchised communities. I'm Holly Snape. I am from I'm the CEO of Community Waikato. My history has been in community development and advocacy. My current role focuses on supporting community groups and charitable organisations and community-led initiatives. Raymond Mudford is the former president of Residents and Ratepayers Association. He's also an international consultant and is passionate about grassroots local democracy. Jamie Tuckle, who you've seen already, is a union official. She leads the Māori Women's Welfare League and is the chair of one of our local community centres. She's also passionate about issues that impact communities. She's a wahine toa with a strong voice for Māori. And we have Margaret Evans here as well, who's a former mayor of Hamilton City and a former journalist. She is a local governance specialist and is enthusiastic about grassroots democracy and pathways to political participation. Neil's going to start us off this morning, or this afternoon, so I'm going to pass over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Holly. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I guess we're here today to advocate for the introduction of community boards within Hamilton. It's a new concept for Hamilton, but as you know, not for New Zealand. I've worked in the area of community development for over 30 years, almost 30 years. And in that time, I've seen many of the people in our neighbourhoods not engage with council as they could be. Decisions that affect their lives on a daily basis take place out of reach for many of them. The thought of walking into a council meeting to represent their streets or neighbourhood with an idea, a suggestion or feedback can be daunting and overwhelming experience. And I believe there are many missed opportunities for residents and council to work together. And I believe community boards providing a formal framework would be mutually beneficial. In my time within the community sector, I can't recall residents ever being given the opportunity to seriously look at community boards as being an option, and the decision was made for them. We seek community boards in high deprivation neighbourhoods and a focus on well-being and re-engagement of democracy. There are some big challenges ahead, but many of the solutions will be found and discovered and created at a grassroots level. I would now like to pass the time on to Holly Snape, CEO at Community Waikato.
Thanks, Neil. I think we appreciate that our sitting councillors were a little bit surprised by our interest in community boards, but they have really, I think, demonstrated interest in considering how local committees might be better represented or better connected to council activity. They settled in the end unanimously on a community committee concept as a means to test this whole concept. But the reality is the community committee does not have the real mandate of a community board. We want community boards as that mechanism to really strengthen communities through active neighbourhood engagement. Local government have that fundamental role in fostering the well-being of the city they represent. But understanding, and Paula sort of related to this a little bit as well, really understanding the nuances of the issues and at a real neighbourhood level and responding appropriately becomes really impossible as our city grows. And even at 165,000 people, community boards encourage that village democracy approach of that by the people, for the people. We know the time frame is really tight. We really appreciate that, but we're also confident that we've got the mechanisms in place to be able to work towards the October election should we get a positive response from this appeal process today. So I implore that you allow us this opportunity and say yes for community boards in Hamilton City. And I'm going to pass over to Ray.
It is a new concept, we all accept that, but only in Hamilton. The community boards have been established throughout the country in a variety of situations that we can use as models for us because we're on a journey of discovery. Since we've raised the issue in August last year, we've had a groundswell of support, and not just support from people of my age, but people who are leaders in our community and people at the beginning of their journey of life. And all are saying, this sounds like a really, really good idea. We've accepted that democracy connections are broken. We know that it's not just in New Zealand, we're experiencing it worldwide as well. And the gap is wide between those who make decisions and those who are affected by decisions. Therefore, we want effective opportunities for community input. We need the people at the grassroots or flax roots strengthened. We want localism in the suburbs. We want to make our elected members accessible and accountable. Councillors are full-time in meetings and closed workshops. We're excluded from those discussions. They have huge agendas, and we sympathise with the length of time they spend discussing our welfare. And they say they consult. They may do, but we don't hear it. And there are no other conversations. There are no opportunity to sit around the table and let's have a hearty conversation where we may agree to disagree, but that's the way life is. Community boards will foster democracy at the neighbourhood level. And this year, we are ready to make it work. Over to Jamie.
Oh, kia ora Raymond, and kia ora koutou katoa anō. I guess I'm going to speak from the heart because a community person of 25 years, I think I'm entitled to be that person. So I just want to explain that that my kōrero did have the Māori wards in it. But I opt to have that taken out because I didn't want us to focus on Māori wards because it's about community boards for us. After listening to Mayor Pula Southgate just now, I feel that our Māori population has been put at a disadvantage in terms of the Māori wards and community boards because certainly they would have juggled that and thought what's more important to them at this point in time. And the fact that community boards did rate at a lower percentage, it wouldn't be because Māori weren't interested or had a deeply felt answer for that. It's because they would have weighed up what was going on at that time. So I think it was a disadvantage putting community boards with Māori wards at that time. So it is about village democracy for us, being in grassroots, with grassroots people, and with the Māori Women's Welfare League, we are forever being inundated by government organisations to Awhi and Manaaki, all government departments and government organisations to reach into the community because they can't get there. Now that's a total admittance that they know they need that grassroots level of people and level of boards and groups, but they don't have them, they don't get them. So they come to the Māori Women's Welfare League because we can get we can walk in the door that they can't walk in. So when we're talking about our whānau in our communities, the voice of democracy includes our low income to no income. And we have those people, they have those families in every community. They do not have a say, they do not have an opportunity, and there's no chance for them to have a say without having grassroots people on community boards reaching out to them. It is about the people for us and the unrepresented and marginalised whānau in our communities. So at the end of the day, it is about community boards for us. We are deeply concerned that we don't have them, and we are absolutely asking that we consider that the council considers having community boards. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jamie.
Put up. Greetings to the Commissioner.
Sorry, Margaret.
That's all right. I'm a bit quick to up.
Yeah.
And I begin by acknowledging the passion in our presenters today. It's very obvious to the Commissioner, surely, that this has become a much discussed topic in our city. We believe it's the right thing to do now. And I think it's important to understand that the councillors were a bit caught by surprise. And if you go back to the presentations that they've done today, you will see that community boards weren't really raised at all in their initial workshops. And so when Neil came along in August on our behalf and raised it with council, they missed an opportunity. So that even from that stage, the community didn't get a chance to be adequately briefed on this subject. So I guess Holly and Community Waikato and the various community houses and groups like Jamie's Māori Women's Welfare League, etc., they all have picked up this issue. And this is the first time in 3 decades that this discussion has actually been held in this city. I want to emphasise that not just this group, but everybody in all of our networks has been involved in the extensive background research on this. We have picked up definitions of what community of interest means. We've familiarised ourselves with the law on community boards. We have looked at the Community Boards Association through Local Government New Zealand, and we are very confident that we are placed in the city to meet statutory and policy tests with the official data that's already available, which means this could all be achievable for the October elections this year. I also want to make a couple of points. It's been said that there was no appetite for community boards in the city. It's interesting that if you think about that metaphor, appetite is about whether or not you want to nourish yourself on something. And I think well-nourished people tend to sniff their noses a bit at new foods. Whereas if you are hungry, you will practically eat anything that's put in front of you. We are saying that community boards sort of fit into that. People didn't know about community boards until we raised it with them. And it would be fair to say we haven't had anybody in our hui, in our discussions, that has said no. Everybody knows about democracy. That they don't practice it is not the issue. We see this is not just about grassroots. This is about seed beds. There's been a lot of talk recently about teaching our children civics. Well, we're saying by creating community boards at neighbourhood level, we strengthen the neighbourhoods, but also those will be the seed beds through associations with the local schools, with the local sports groups, with the local NGOs, where the children will learn about how to practice democracy. So from every count, we're saying, please do it now. Finally, you will note that we haven't said cover the whole city in community boards. We have said phase this in. And the first places we've said, pick those suburbs. And everybody in Hamilton knows who those suburbs are, where they are most disengaged, where the deprivation indexes show how undernourished they are. Let them choose their own leaders. Let them choose their own agendas. Let them negotiate their role with the City Council for the future. Please give us these boards in October.
Back to me. Thanks, Margaret. Passionate and already touched on, I suppose, what I'm going to talk about finally, which is around the areas that we identified initially in our submission. And these areas do represent those higher levels of socioeconomic deprivation. Interestingly, they have also not historically had elected members coming from living in these communities. And I think that that's really poignant and something that we need to reflect on. They also have a range of community assets that would help support community boards. So they've got community houses, schools, churches, local businesses that can all support the formation and the decision making and everything involved with their local community board. One area of particular interest that we identified was the CBD. And, you know, we're seeing as a result of some of these new housing policies, we've got a growing residential population in the CBD, but it's also where many of, or most actually, of our emergency housing individuals are housed and located. They're a highly transient population, but they're also probably the most vulnerable population that we have in Hamilton City. We're open to change these boundaries. We're open to have conversations about the neighbourhoods being put forth, but we do see there's a logic behind what we're proposing here. We're just passionate about facilitating greater community engagement in local government politics and growing access to local democracy and generating like neighbourhood solutions for neighbourhood problems. Ngā mihi nui, thank you for your time today, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Holly, and thanks to the team for the preparation that you've gone into this piece of work, and also for the presentations today. Very, very well done. I just need to pick up commissioners. Commissioner Anea, you've got your hand up. You're ready to go.
Thank you. I am. So I've just got a couple of questions. So when you were talking to the community about community boards, did you also ask them that thorny question, are they prepared to pay the cost, the additional cost of a community board?
Certainly, certainly that was a part of the discussion, absolutely. And I think, you know, when we talk about rising rates, we understand the impact that it has on communities and absolutely has on renters. We realise they also pay rates in their own way. So yes, we have had those conversations. Yes, I think there's always concern about that. I don't want to get too much in the detail of where I think you should split the pie. There are other projects that I think are actually quite costly that lots of money goes into, that I would argue putting it into community democracy agency would be a better spend, but I'm not an elected member to make that decision. So I am a ratepayer though. I am a ratepayer though, and certainly see this as like my library contribution, like, you know, all the contribution I make, I see this as certainly primary and extremely important.
So if it was phased in, would you expect those communities that are benefiting for a community board to pay for them, or would you want it to be absorbed throughout the whole of Hamilton City?
Margaret, yep.
Commissioner Janey, hi. Can I perhaps just go back to your first question? I think it's important to understand that in our submission, we had a lot of fun discussing this particular point. And you may note, buried in the copy, we did say that we anticipate about 4 hours a week for the newly elected board members, and we suggested they should be paid the living wage only. Now, we said that because there is quite a bit of concern about the level of pay for existing councillors, which runs out at about 90 to 100,000 a year in Hamilton, and that they're full-time. So we wanted to make sure that the benchmark was realistic. The other point is that we would anticipate that the new boards would negotiate with the council. The benchmark there, currently, the community houses in Hamilton, 9, maybe 10 of them, their total overall budget, according to council reports, is about 3.4 million a year. Now, the council only contributes less than 350,000 towards those. So you can see the negotiations would be very vigorous, but we would think those negotiations should be left up to the new boards.
I'm just wondering, just for I thought that the remuneration for community boards would come out of the councillors' pool, and that the remuneration authority actually sets the payment for community board members. Am I right about that, Donald?
might be better people to answer this than me, but after going through a bit of a process discussion with the council and some analysis, the Remuneration Authority does set the remuneration for community board members, but I don't think it comes out of the councillors' pool.
No.
Oh, you don't think it does? I thought it did. Oh, initially they were talking about it coming out, but I think they have kept it separate. That's exactly right. Well, thank you. That's really helpful. Just the other question that I've got is the areas of deprivation. Do you believe that they are also the communities of interest?
Yes, absolutely. There are a number of aspects that connect these communities. I think the Melville Bay that's the area that I suppose I'm more connected to. I've worked in the community here for. I've been in the community for near on 15 years and was the local community house manager for a long time. And absolutely, there is a sense of identity in this space, but how we carve out boundaries is another area that we had some fun conversations, because it is difficult, and I don't know how you just stop at a road and perhaps people on this side are a part of it and people on that side aren't. So I don't have, I suppose, the knowledge or history on how you manage that kind of thing. Margaret?
Oh, I agree. If you asked anybody, taxi drivers, anybody in the street, what are the major suburbs, neighbourhoods in Hamilton, and what are the poorest areas, they would all be able to answer. And we've tested this. It's pretty obvious. And the people who live in those areas acknowledge that too. The tragedy and part of the motivation in all of this is that their status has been pretty unchanged ever since I can remember. And that's more motivation to try and get in there and yes.
Okay, can I just extend the question, and I want to go to the council for right of reply. A number of observations made by each of the submitters suggests overall that there's modest or negligible engagement. So Neil talked about high deprivation areas. Holly talked about the need for community engagement. Raymond said that democracy connections are broken, there's no opportunity to engage. Jamie said Maori Women's Welfare League, I kind of like the one-stop shop for everything that's going on to get to the coalface. Margaret spoke about phasing in the disengaged areas. The obvious question in the right of reply to council to help us to determine, the arguments is, tell us from your perspective how you are engaging with these communities at the moment, so that we get a sense, are you or are you not? So I just want to leave that landed on the table for right of reply. Commissioner Anea asked the question around funding, which is one of those really crucial questions that always comes up. So from council's perspective, should community boards be something that did get landed on the table, how would the council want to see them funded? I'd like to know what their position is in that space. And my last point in right of reply is, what's council's view about a proposition that only puts community boards into low deprivation areas? Because I find that really interesting dynamic, and not one that I've seen around the country. So I'm keen to understand why only in low socio or low demographic areas. So those are questions that I want laid in front of council for right of reply, please. Commissioner Piper.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just trying to think how to couch it. The strong argument I've heard Holly and colleagues is that community boards will provide people who don't have a voice better access to the voice and the ears and voice of councillors. Given the voter turnout in Hamilton and other cities, And given, for example, the transient population in the central area, I mean, would they be there long enough to register on the roll? But remember that you have to have a 3-month, you know, given some of those difficulties, what other, did you examine any other options? And if so, what were they?
I'm going to start with the first part, and I'll probably pass to Margaret for the second. But in terms of, and I suppose going to the question that's going to council about them engaging across the city, I have to give full credit to council, and this one in particular has been one of the best councils we've seen in a really long time, and absolutely they do what they can to communicate and connect with communities. You know, I can't take away from them with that. They've been fantastic. I think the difficulty is how you connect to people at a really grassroots level who are already quite disenfranchised and disconnected from the system. And that's where we see community boards as an absolute legitimate option, because the people we anticipate on the boards, we were talking as well about the mixed model of elected and appointed. And the reason for that appointed is to ensure we've got adequate representation across that community, and to make sure, I think Paula pointed out really well when she talked about it's not just about loud minority voices, because sometimes people who have a particular passion can drive that forward, but it's not necessarily representing everybody that you're wanting, you know, or the whole community. So what we're looking for are people with those grassroots relationships. They are connections into those conversations that can happen in a way that is so much more safe for somebody to have. Approaching council and sitting at that council table and trying to advocate for yourself or for others can be a hugely intimidating process. And council do a lot to try and get into the communities to connect with people, but without that relationship, we just don't really see it happen. But I want to pass to Margaret to talk a little bit more about, you know, the research that was done prior to why we settled on community boards.
I think firstly, the first answer to that question is because there's an entitlement in law, and that particular entitlement has never really been explored in Hamilton. So we started by, well, why hasn't been? And I have to say we haven't got an answer to that. It's just never been on the agenda. And I think perhaps because the neighbourhood house movement, the community organisation movements are fairly strong in the city. Right across the board, theatre, sports, business, etc. So Chair Brendan, really another question that I think we'd love you to ask the council is why they shouldn't have community boards. Because this is like we are asking for something that there is provision in law, but it's just never been properly discussed. So we're saying rather than waste more time discussing it, just let's do it. Coming back to Holly's point, there is an appetite here for more involvement, but the appetite, like many communities around the world, is set out again in lots of academic discussions on community of interest. And most people everywhere feel they belong to the area where they live. And we think that's what we're talking about. That's why we use the term city of villages. That's why we're talking about neighbourhoods. If we can engage people with a feeling of empowerment within their own neighbourhoods, we think that would be a recipe for success.
Okay, be interesting, won't it, to find, we should ask Mike Reid for some, to make sure there's some research happens about the CB's, community boards, success or otherwise, and engagement as opposed to, for example, promoting local projects. Which takes me to my last question, and that is what kinds of stuff do communities of interest miss out on at the moment? How would I put that? But are there areas where a local community would say, look, we need this and you're not giving it to us? Is there much of that in Hamilton and sort of in terms of locally or community-based activity?
Perhaps one of the issues that's been sort of vaguely discussed in recent times is the extent of facilities in new suburbs. And Rototuna would be an example. Now, I'm not advocating for and against that, because clearly if you are an expanding city with new areas, you want to make sure that they are properly equipped from the beginning. But it's a fine balance when you ask yourself, why are there no weeds in Rototuna? And yet in the poor areas of town, the footpaths need redoing, the curbing and channeling needs redoing. There is not much facility provided by the city.
If I could just add to that, is that okay if I add to that? I mean, every election that I've been involved in local government, I've always raised the issue of 8 or 10 houses down one driveway with exorbitant rent. They're all it's just, we've got our poorest families living in these houses where their children have only the front concrete footpath to play on. There's only 2 driveways to go right down to 8 or 9 houses. And the landlords live overseas. They don't care about the state of the house. They don't care that the driveways are dangerous for the kids. They don't care about the mold and everything else that goes on with these houses. And yet those people are so grateful just to have a house. They don't say anything because they don't want to be kicked out of their house or evicted because they complain too much. So they just live in that squalor because they're happy to have a house. And these are our poor families in these communities.
We also have
Okay, can we just bear with me, guys? Raymond's had his hand up for quite some. Yeah, I need to give Raymond a chance. I do apologise, Raymond. Your hand's been up for a wee while there, but
That's right. It's not tired.
Shoot. And then we're going to move on after this, guys, because we're way beyond time. Yeah.
Right. To answer one of the questions regarding funding, I think we shouldn't ignore that in this arena, there are those in the community who have done well in their life and want to give something back and don't look for financial reward to achieve that. I don't think they should be taken out of the equation. The other thing is in regards to community living in the recent conversation, what we're seeing today is high intensification, particularly in the lower decile areas. So you're seeing houses, there are 10 houses per hectare, moving to 30 to 40 to 60 houses per hectare, and no additional community facilities being planned. So that's where the community boards can actually have an influence and start saying to council that these areas are changing, and we accept that, but these are additional services that we need to see in order for this community to have a quality well-being.
Okay, thank you. And so on that point, the very, very last question to go back for the right of reply, I'm sure council has a policy on the criteria that you use. It's usually a distance to a recreation point. Almost all councils will have that. In the right of reply, you might want to give some commentary about what the current standards are and maybe what you're anticipating as a consequence of growth, what those variables might be. So that's access to, libraries and aquatic centres and parks and so on. Usually there's a criteria for that. So look, we'll park that up there. I am aware, so we've had Jason on the line for a wee while. I think we've given everybody a fair go, Holly. You guys were very good in keeping to your 1 minute each. We've let you have a really, really good go after that. And that's just a respectful part of the process. You're like every other local authority across New Zealand. We've never kept time on this, so you're just part of the same fold. So don't stress about it. So thank you. And Penny, can we bring in Jason, please?
Yes, sure. Just again, a little moment of wonder while I push some buttons, and we won't be long.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time too.
Yes.
Ora.
Thank you.
Ka kite. Right.
Here we go. And just bringing Jason through now. And I think in all of that button pushing, we've just lost Janie. I think that was entirely my fault. Hopefully Janie will come back to us in just a second.
Kia ora, Jason.
Kia ora, how are you, Chair?
Well, we're great. I apologise for going beyond time there, but I know that you've been watching in the background. So you've got a good sense of what occurred. So we're in your hands. Pass it to you for a summary of your observations.
Thank you. If I can be cheeky enough.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just double check that Janie's on board?
Yep, she's here. Yep.
If I can just acknowledge also the previous submitters in the work that they've done in there, that I'm supportive of Holly and their team and the great work they've been doing there as well. If I can be cheeky to add that at the start of my presentation today.
Sure.
So firstly, I just want to start off with where I've come into this is that what I don't want it to have disputed is that I do support the introduction of Māori representation on there. Do support the introduction of the new electoral system and the proposed increase in electoral representation. So just want to put those out there, and I'll just also take that my submission made. I take as read by the commissioners. Oh, I won't go line by line through there.
No.
So the court. I don't want to use up my 10 minutes on all of that. So I was probably going to start with the key point that I think is core to what's brought me to the appeal, is that I have the concern that in Hamilton you have two people in the same geographic location have significantly different voting power to the same authority based solely on ethnicity. So if I can use the example that I provided in my submission, if you've got above, it's just above 15. So we'll take the example of Jane and John, both live in the same house, same street, same area of town. No, Jane's on the general roll, John's on the Māori roll. In the last local body elections, they got to vote for 6 East Ward councillors and the mayor, and it's all tickety-boo. What I see being proposed here under this one is that Jane will still get to vote for 6 representatives, but John will only get to vote for 2. And yet nothing has changed in terms of the geographic location. So I have a very deep concern that now we're represented based on ethnicity, that just because John is identified as Māori for the Māori electoral purposes, he doesn't get the same voting power as Jane does in that situation. And that is fundamentally my overall concern. I acknowledge the Māori populations and how Māori wards are broken down, but yeah, I have a very deep concern that we're disenfranchising Māori by not giving them the same electoral votes as that of a non-Māori participant. And if you look at the parliamentary system, for example, if you go to the exact same scenario, you know, Jane and John both go to the polls on election day. They both still only vote for their one representative, whether it's on the Māori roll or for the Māori ward or for the parliamentary general roll ward. So I have this concern that when trying to mix geographic representation and overlaying it with trying to achieve ethnic representation at the same time, and I don't think the two are moulding together in a way which is supportive of Māori having the same electoral voting rights as that of non-Māori. Hence, that's why my concern, and why in the later part of it, I wonder, is this a question of upholding the Bill of Rights, because, you know, allowing electoral freedoms, ensuring that votes are equal, irrelevant of race, gender, sexuality, and all those things that we hold quite dearly. Is this indirectly? And I don't think it's a malicious thing that counts on. I think it's just that because the process came through quite quickly and, to my opinion, rushed. This has just been something which is rolled out. And this is just one of those unforeseen consequences where, while we doing great work getting Māori representation at the top table, the actual voter who represents that now has had a loss of voting power, given that they no longer get to vote for six members, but the person living in the bedroom opposite does get to vote for 6 others. So that's essentially my argument, or my view on this whole scenario. I have put through a couple of options, and my preferred one, my preferred sort of electoral model is still keeping 5 in each ward, and still being able to vote. Everyone still being able to vote for a ward, one of their 5 ward representatives, and then getting maybe a little bit technical. If you're on the general roll, being able to elect 2 at large from a general roll standpoint, and then having 2, and then those on the Māori roll could also elect 2 candidates at large from the Māori roll. And I can see that as actually being the positives I see, particularly for the 2 elected from the general roll, is actually getting a great degree of diversity around the table. Sure, council will acknowledge that we have a strong Pacifica community in Hamilton, and we've had a number of Pacifica candidates stand in East and West wards, but because of how their population bases in East and West isn't enough to get them over the magic line. If you had them going Pacifica candidate standing at large, you'd be able to possibly get a Pacifica candidate or Pacific councillor at an at-large decision. So I think there's an ability to have a greater diversity of representation if we allowed a little bit more flexibility around the voting models. Conversely, I've also put in there that a complete at-large system for 12 councillors and a whole Māori ward, which allows Māori to vote for 2 Māori ward councillors, and then using, if I understand the local government, local electoral act correctly, would then allow to also vote for 12 at-large representatives as well, if my understanding of that section is correct. So that's what I want to try and throw down here in 5 minutes, and hopefully can catch up a bit of time, but you're happy to take any questions.
Well done, Jason. You deserve a medal for the speed. Thank you. I just wonder if I shouldn't go to Donald as our advisor, just in terms of a couple of comments that Jason has made. I suppose what I'm looking for is a little bit on the public record, the parameters in which the Commission can influence or not, because some of the suggestions that you have there about what you feel we might be able to do, I think are beyond what our scope is. But just in an just because I think it's, it's a professional thing to do. It's a fair thing to do. You've put some challenges there, especially around the Bill of Rights Act. But I'm just not sure that we're really in that space to be able to do anything. But Donald, just an overview as our advisor.
Yeah, so I've looked at Jason's 2 options. So as I understand them, first option there'd be an East Ward and a West Ward, each electing 5 councillors, and everyone would vote for them. And then an at-large Mary Ward and an at-large General Ward. The problem there is that, I don't want to get into too much detail, but it's a bit hard not to. The number of Māori ward members is calculated on the total number of ward members. So that's how you've got 2 out of whatever it is, 2 out of 14. So under that sort of scenario where you have essentially, well, it's a little bit complicated, but I'm not sure the formula would work for ending up with a Māori ward member. And then likewise, under your second option, you have 12 councillors elected at large by all voters, and a Māori ward electing 2 councillors. So again, that doesn't comply with what the Local Electoral Act allows. I tried to make that not too technical, but I'm not sure.
So essentially, we are bound by the Local Electoral Act, by that piece of legislation. And I think what you're suggesting is, though Jason has proffered some suggestions, they are beyond the realms of what the current Act allows. Is that a
Yes,
fair way to articulate it?
That sums it up. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I just think it's important to understand that, because I don't want to get the sense that, we can charge in and change the Crown's legislation, because we can't. So I'll just, Jason.
If I could just so I can clarify that point. So given that the current Māori ward is essentially a whole city ward already, so it's essentially just that still remaining set and still keeping the 12. I'm just thinking of the other option there of having an at-large as well, given that the Māori ward is already an all city ward already.
You could have a scenario where you had a Maori ward, obviously. Then you'd have to have one or more general wards, and then you could have at-large members, which across the whole city, which everyone could vote for. So that's theoretically an option, but then you'd have to look at the mix of different numbers of councillors and the respective populations to see how that would pan out.
Donald, it's Sue here, can I just try and help? If you look at Jason, Donald, have I got this right? If you look, Jason, at your first option, which is an East Ward with 5 councillors, a West General, let's call them East General Ward, West General Ward, Māori Ward, and then an at-large component. The general wards, you'd only have people voting in the general wards who were on the general roll, and you'd only have people voting in the Māori ward if they were on the Māori electoral roll. So in a sense, what we're trying to say to you is that if you're going to have, in terms of your second option, you've got 2 wards. You've got a Māori ward and a general ward. And I think that's where the confusion has started, is that you've, as I might say, take general for everybody, but it isn't. General is for people on the general roll, as it is called in law, I think, a general electoral roll. Is that helpful? So neither can work the way that you anticipated, shall we say.
And that then goes back to my example point. We've now split the population based on ethnicity. So once again, I go back to my point that you're living in the same house, and a Māori ward representative only gets 2 and a general gets 6. So I've been trying to work out a way that I would actually scrap a ward system being geographically based and not ethnically based.
Okay, got that observation. We'll go to Commissioner Anea.
I think the solution would be to have the council, in their right of reply, talk to us about their thinking around that issue, because you make a really good point, Jason. And so it'll be great to hear, because, there was the option of having a mixed model as well. So let's hear what the council has to say, and that would be really illuminating. Thank you.
Okay, so Jason, thanks for the effort that you put in and the observations that you've made, and thanks for hanging on the line. I'm sorry we held you up as long as we did.
No, thank you to the Commission for hearing me today.
Kia ora. Okay, Penny will do what needs to be done there. And so just go back to Mayor Paula. I know we've shot over time, but don't stress. We need a break. Is it all right to come back at 3 o'clock? Is that enough time to have a break, do what you need to do? Yeah, all right. So Penny will take a break till 3. You'll just give instructions as you usually do.
Sure. So our live stream will continue. If anyone wants to leave the live stream and rejoin, you can do that. You just access the webinar the same way you did at the beginning. Otherwise, you can just mute yourselves and turn your videos off and stay right where you are. And then we'll be back about 3.
Okay, and commissioners, we'll just have a quick ring in. We'll just do a quick ring in. Yep. Okay. Cheers.
Brendan,
Yeah,
I can hear you. Are you having trouble turning your video on?
I haven't touched the video. You did.
Okay.
That was a step too far. So oh, wait on. I'll try it here. I'll try it here. There you go. Are we all good, Penny? Yeah. Okay, so we're all back. Yes. So we can pass back to you, Mayor Paula and team, just for the short, succinct writer reply, and then we're done.
Oh, thank you very much. So I'm starting with, excuse me, because I'm a world's best scribbler. So we're going with the first appeal around community boards.
Yep.
You asked us how we are engaging, and how do we engage with the community, and we share their passion for engagement with the community, and it's an actual key focus of this term of council. So we're in the midst of a lot of other methods. Just make the point, of course, that engaging with the community in person is a lot harder during these times, but not making an excuse. We do look at ways of engaging. We have, for example, in the lower socioeconomic areas, we have projects underway that are quite revolutionary to really revitalise and refresh those communities from the ground up. We have 12 community advisors, of course, so they're out and about, not only in geographic parts of the city, but they're also assigned, Lance might talk about this in a bit more detail if you're interested, portfolios of interest. So they have not only geographic community of interest, but they'll have, you know, a specific community of interest like aging population or youth and so on. And so we've got a project, for example, the Te Papanui Enderley revitalisation project that involves stakeholders from the community houses in that area, Te Koha Health, which is the health provider, Kainga Ora, Waikato Tainui, and the grassroots community through the various social enterprises that they've got going on in Enderley. And that's going to be pretty exciting, because instead of just, you know, scratching the surface with a playground here or a bit of paint there, we're actually structure planning the revitalisation of Enderley. And that's the approach we'd like to take. We actually are seeing a big, and thank you very much to Holly for acknowledging that, I appreciate it. We're seeing a really large uptake in review. Last time, of course, with our rep review, we had 30 people engaged. This time it's 429. We can all argue that we wish that more people would engage, but that's a systemic local government issue as well as anything else. And for our long-term plan consultation, just by way of interest, because I'm going to tell you some of the things we did there. Last time, the previous LTP, we got 2,100 submissions. This time we got 5,600 submissions across a huge variety of people. We did, and will continue to do, go and worked with youth across 4 schools. We couldn't get to all schools because we were trialling new methods, but we went to Rototuna, which is a new shiny part of the city. We went to Fairfield, which is lower socioeconomic, Girls High and Hillcrest High, and we worked extensively through the social studies department and other ways. And we actually had students turning up and sitting and appearing before council with their submissions to the plan. Have to tell you, some of those students actually got what they asked for too, which is bonus for them because they made such really good and well-informed submissions. So we are doing a lot of things. In Rototuna, which is the new area, we work from the community up to design their community village. We had, I can't go on all day about it, but we had the school ran consultation for the students. The retirement village out there ran consultation for the seniors. The local community house group ran generalised consultation, and we had open days and we had virtual displays and all that kind of thing going on. And we just sort of started putting the spade in the ground to deliver on that community expectation. So I guess the point I would make there is that community engagement is so much more than having a meeting and deciding on some priorities. It's actually using the grassroots community to build their own future. And that I could give you more examples, but I won't. In terms of community boards versus community groups or community committees, we have always had structures that function as community boards and advisories, community committees and advisories, and they've delivered great outcomes and they're for purpose. So for example, if we had a group of individuals together for 4 or 5 years, Lance, who worked on the age-friendly strategy, which we got endorsed by the age-friendly organisation in New York. Now they put together that strategy and the implementation plan alongside our community developers. Now largely that group is disbanded as part from a small group of sort of oversight. So it's horses for courses. I am open to the idea of community boards, but and community groups or in this trial method, but we want to explore what is the most effective and efficient, and including cost-effective way of getting to as many people as possible. We're concerned that the budget required would have to come from somewhere else. Two things: it would either have to come from an existing budget, and often it's the community projects that are picked off because the core infrastructure is not going to be touched. So it is the nice things that build community that quite often are the last scrabble in the LTP. And I know that because you guys have been through that process, you understand what I mean. So otherwise, it'd have to be a targeted rate. Who would you target it at? The lower socioeconomic people themselves, or would you expect other parts of the city to pay for the facilities for the lower socioeconomic areas? Now, I don't know the answer to that. I'm just raising those as discussions that we need to have. Nobody talked about it from the group as to whether they would expect the board to be a budgeted board or just an advisory board. Would it actually spend on projects? Even then, at the moment, we're severely constrained. Our budget is so tight it squeaks in terms of the community aspects. So I'm a bit worried about that. I did ask Dale, because I have him in the room to lean on, whether in the areas where, and I acknowledge that there are lots of places with boards, there's 41 councils of 66 have community boards, so it's over 50%, I get that. But apparently the engagement as a result doesn't match that trend. In fact, sometimes there are by-elections because board positions remain vacant or they can't get enough community interest. So there again, I just ask whether that is the right solution for the problem. But I do definitely want to talk to all of those individuals who put their appeal in, because they are rooted in their local community. I'd like to talk to them about how we get behind those community houses further. Neil runs one of the best ones in the city, to be honest, the Western Community Centre. It's an amazing place, all credit to his work and his team. But we'd like to lift some of the other community houses to that same extent. And I just mentioned about the Fairfield Papanui one and the project there. In terms of the other question you asked, and another part in terms of our engagement is our social media campaigns, because let's think about how people want to connect with us. Some people want to meet, some people want you to come to them. Some people actually engage through social media, and our social media channels, all of them, have just gone exponentially upwards. People are engaging with us through those spaces, and that data is being used to inform plans and strategies, but it's also used as a way of replying to the people around their local concerns. We've got an app called the Inteno app, so if there is a unmowed piece of park or a pothole or something like that, they can put it in, get an instant job number, and within a short period of time have someone assess the concern and preferably put it right.
And we've just launched the Voice of Hamilton, which is a sounding board of 5,000 to 6,000 people who can put their names forward, and then we can test ideas and things like that with them and then get that back. So they're not formal surveys, but it's a quick way of actually engaging with a sample of the population, and those people will be from right across Kirikiri Rā.
Yeah, and one point on the lower deprivation areas, as opposed to any part of the city having a community board, I'd want to explore that a bit more with the people who've appealed here and have that conversation, because, for example, the shiny new north, it was sadly lacking in community facilities for a long time. Just the lag in getting those done. As I said, their village centre is just underway now. There's 3 or 4 undeveloped parks, and we'll send it to you, and you can't really see this, but we're talking about this area up here, which has the least number of dots per resident, and that's about access way to community facilities. So the data doesn't necessarily bear that out, but I have a huge heart for those lower socioeconomic areas, and we are putting a lot of staff resource into that, a dedicated team in one area for sure. And if that goes well, we'll be rolling it out to other areas. Community, yeah, so we do, Lance could tell you all about it. We do have the policy and the criteria around recreational space, how close a neighbourhood park should be, community parks, and those areas do have those facilities. We will acknowledge that our city has 2 parts. It has the shiny new bits and it has the ageing parts of the city. But having said that, we have got a program to put love and care into the ageing parts of the city. Norton, which is one of those socioeconomic areas that we're talking about, had a $1 million destination playground put in there, in Dominion Park. Huge success. People were concerned that it might be damaged, you know, and various other things about it, but it's right next to a community facility, so it's observed, and they've taken love and ownership of it. They love it. And so, you know, I want to see us do more of that. So anyway, I hope that answers your questions on the community boards. Was there anything I missed on that one?
No, that's very, very helpful. It's the important questions to ask, and those are points of clarity. You might, Lance, you just might want to flick through that policy stuff through to Donald. Be the easiest thing to do, just in terms of the those specifications. Rightio, well done. On that basis, there's nothing else you wish to observe, so you're done.
I'll say one thing about the support for it. Community boards, it was intimated that we hadn't discussed it, and it sort of laid low for a very long time. I have to dispute that. All the evidence, you saw the slides that we gave you in the beginning, and you would have seen that they were on there then. Dale runs our process and has brought community boards to the table every time we've had a review. Now, but it has been discussed, it just hasn't generated an outcome that of a board.
Okay.
And,
no, look, that's fine. Thank you very, very much for that, answering those points of clarity that are really important in a right of reply. So the process from now, Donald,
did you want to
have we missed something?
Yeah, I think there was another question arising out of Jason Howarth's presentation. And it was
does what we
the Murray Ward,
about a mixed model of representation.
Yeah. So I'll talk about that then, and I'll get a little bit of data specific on it, and ask staff to step in and give you the facts. The process wasn't rushed. In fact, it took a great deal of time and many hours of conversations with Mata Waka, Hapu, Iwi, and various others to get here. And also the mixed model was explored with council. I refer you back to that diagram that Sue was asking about before, with the high, low, medium impact matrix. There just wasn't enough community interest to warrant it coming up again. As I say, 60% of those who submitted wanted to retain the east-west ward. People feel particularly affiliated to being an eastie or a westie, and that became quite clear. A mixed model would have at this stage added an extra layer of complexity, and it doesn't still create that equality, and I'll get Chelsea to explain why it doesn't. And given that we're going to STB and the public had quite a lot to grapple with, we felt that it wasn't the time to make bolder changes. There was no favour in the mixed model politically, but there was a little bit of point of difference between general wards and 2 wards. The only difficulty with the general ward is because it's based on population, it would actually reduce the Māori seat to 1 rather than 2. So that's a bit of a problem, but Chelsea can explain that.
Yeah, so basically looking at the at-large option for us, the mixed model, the best we could do would be having 4 candidates elected at large, 8 elected in general wards, 4 in each, and 2 elected citywide in the Māori wards, which would allow people on the general electoral roll to influence the election of 8 candidates and Māori to influence 6. So, and the 4 ward system, the closest we could get there in terms of equity between those electoral voters would be 3 on the general ward and 2 on the Māori ward. So neither of those options give us actual equity. They do provide a greater balance. But at that stage, we didn't have that kind of impetus from the community. And I don't know, Amy, if you've got that diagram from our consultation to share. We had within our consultation document quite a clear diagram. Oh, there you go. Which said that this was one of the options we looked at. And right underneath that is a little sentence that says, this is what we're proposing, but what do you think? And very few submissions, apart from Jason's, really came back and suggested that they'd like to see that. So it's not that it wasn't put out there and it wasn't considered. But that was the best that we could do in terms of mix.
Yep. Sorry, Brendan, you're mute.
Right. Thank you.
I do it all the time, you see. So. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks for that, Chelsea. That cleans that up nicely, I think. Donald, we're all covered off. Right. Okay. Right. So let's agree that we're done. And to summarise, just to tell you that the Commission is obligated to make its decision by the 10th of April, which is not far away. I think you all will be well aware that we are very deep in the process at the moment, and it's really, really hectic. So my response back to you, Mayor Paula, is thanks to the team in the background that helped to pull these things together with our team. We don't know you all personally, but I have to say it's really gone very smoothly. And also the information that you've provided has been exceptionally well received and very easy to follow. So congratulations on the process that you've gone through. So we'll deliberate as we usually do, and then in due course that decision will come out. The only thing left to do is to close with our karakia, and I'm going to call on our CE to close with the Commission's karakia, and then we will we'll bail out, and then we'll Commissioners will chime in again for the next part of the process, which is to deliberate. So thank you again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So our closing karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia i te uru tapanui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa e te ara takatū. Koe rā e rongo whakairia, ake ki runga, kia wātia, ei rā kua wātia, hau pai mārere.
Thank you.